This is TAU Unbound, the English language podcast of Tel Aviv University. Please welcome your host, Aharoni, Tel Aviv University's graduate, member of the Board of Governors, lecturer, writer, and veteran diplomat.
Welcome to TAU Unbound. This is Aharoni, your host, and today it gives me a great pleasure to host Dr. Harel Chorev. Welcome to our studio.
Thank you, Ido.
Harel is an expert on social media and the Middle East. Officially, his title is the head of the Doron Halpern Middle East Network Analysis Desk at the Moshe Dayan Center at Tel Aviv University. But he likes to describe himself as a historian, focusing on informal networks in the Middle East and their analysis with tools combining empirical historical study and network theory. We'll learn all about this. But before that, as I always do with all my guests, tell me, please, a little bit about your background. How did you end up studying the Middle East, and more particularly, how did you end up studying social networks in the Middle East?
Well, it all started from the fact that the only class I've taken during the high school was history. From the rest, I would just skip. I was a very lousy student, but history I loved, always. And after the army, I've decided on the wrong path and studied engineering for 2 years. And then I've decided that's enough for me and decided to follow my natural tendency towards history. And I had to decide between the history of the Holocaust or the Second World War, which I was always very interested in, and the Middle East. For practical reasons and interest, I've decided to go to study Middle Eastern studies and to focus first on Lebanon, and particularly on the Shiites in Lebanon, namely Hezbollah, Amal, all these organizations, families, the major clans. And then during my PhD, I moved to the Palestinians. So I'm a historian of the Palestinians. Wrote a book about it, Networks of Power in Palestine since the 19th century, which is basically combining the turf that you've mentioned, both network analysis as a tool in the hands of a historian.
So October 7th finds you in what phase of your research? What were you studying when October 7th happened?
Well, just 2 days before October 7th, I've submitted my last article about Hamas. And in that article, which was accepted since then, and in that article, I've described the way that Hamas dehumanize Israelis and Jews on social media, and the way it affected the so-called lone wolf phenomena that was basically orchestrated in a major part of it by Hamas. Not only, but in a major part that they play a major role in pushing it forward, in inciting and so on. But I gave a lot of emphasis on the way they dehumanize Jews and Israelis, and I describe it as a very severe phenomena. And having said that, I must say I never imagine they will go so far as to do what they did on October 7th.
We'll get to that. There's a very important point that you brought up. But before that, I would like you to tell us a little bit more about what is it that Hamas actually believe in? We know that they have the original charter, then they have an amended charter, but in both of them, there's a very strong anti-Semitic component, actually a religious commandment.
Yeah.
To target Jews and to harm Jews.
So the 1988 convention or charter of Hamas is bluntly anti-Semitic and using the most I would say terrible tropes or anti-Semitic tropes against the Jews in general, not just Israelis. The Jews are manipulating. The Jews are in the world. The Jews are responsible for everything bad that happens in the world, and so on and so forth. the document from 2017 is not really amended charter. It is like a document of principles, which is a different thing. In that document, they are trying to ease and to soften a little bit some of the principle they used in the charter, but so they are skipping the anti-Semitic parts. Still, they don't forgo the goal of a full destruction of the state of Israel, despite of the fact they're saying that we are ready for intermediate moves and steps in the meantime for truce and stuff like that. But generally, they're not changing radically their main goal, which is destroying completely the Israel as a political entity, as a state. That's very clear there. Now, you have the charter and you have the real life. In real life, they used in so many senses on social media, on institutionalized media, they used the same kind of anti-Semitic tropes. They incited for the unanimous kill of or undiscriminate, killing of any Israeli. Terminology that doesn't differentiate between a settler and an Israeli. All of them are settlers. Tel Aviv is a settlement. Mustawtana Tel Aviv. Haifa is the occupied Haifa. So in that kind of terminology, you see that they didn't really change anything.
Now, let me ask you two questions about that. The first is, what is the explanation to the fact that they killed tens of non-Jews on 10/7? Among them Muslims, and most famously, I've seen the video where they interrogate an Arab Israeli if he knows the Quran. And even after he shows them that he knows the Quran, they shot him in the belly. And they thought they killed him and they left him. But he survived. So the first question is, how does that fit into the picture you're describing, the killing of non-Jews? What is it? Guilt by association because they're working for Jews? They're worthy of dying? That's the first question that I have about that. And then the second is, given what you're saying, do we see similar commitment in other Islamist genocidal groups like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and others?
Well, first, it's a good question why they killed non-Jews, including a student from Tanzania. Really a heartbreaking video, stabbing and shooting him just because he was there. Guilt by association. And they, of course, invented the association because most of them were just workers or a student who came to study agriculture. The guy from East Jerusalem, Muhammad, the driver, who was killed only by the fact that he was a driver, a bus driver or something like that. And that's a really good question. And I think it was a mixture of both sort of a death ecstasy that they were experiencing, and maybe because of the drugs they took, and we know they took drugs. We can even see it in some of the videos they taped, and this thing of destroy everyone that you meet, and this is really connected to something else, to their state of mind and the whole way that this raid was conceptualized. And this brings me to a very old, not even Islamic term, but rather a tribal one, which is called Ghazwe. Ghazwe, it's a raid, but in the tribal pre-Islamic meaning, which mean you need to you need to frighten your enemy in the most furious, terrible way, namely to raid his settlement, to kill, to abduct, to mutilate, to rape, and to enslave people. That's the notion of Ghazwe. And this is exactly what they did, which reminds us, and that's of course brings me to your second question, reminds us ISIS. Exactly those raids. that are similar or assimilate or trying to do some sort of a historical reminder, to use as a historical reminder to Muhammad's army's raids in the Middle East, are really the same. The same kind of thing, the same kind of raids. We still remember the trucks, the same trucks actually, Toyota trucks of ISIS raiding an area, doing exactly the same thing that we experienced on October 7th. This is exactly what Hamas did.
Now, you're an expert in social networks, and it's interesting that in the beginning, they were very enthusiastically sharing everything on social media, including live. Some of the stuff that we've seen it on Facebook feeds taken from the victims themselves. And then, a few weeks after the attack, we started seeing some sort of, I'm not sure if it's a retraction, but they're not as enthusiastically admitting as to what they do. How do you explain that shift? In the beginning, very happy to share with the world what they did, proud of it, and now you hear some even spokespersons embarrassing themselves on international media, denying what happened on the 7th.
Like 93% of the Palestinian population in general, they didn't see even a single movie of October 7, and therefore they can, most of them are saying, we deny that anything like that happened, and it's a whole Jewish conspiracy. Unfortunately, we hear it from others, non-Arabs, non-Palestinians surely, but even, I heard it from a Jewish student in America, saying, no, it's an Israeli conspiracy. She became anti-Zionist for whatever reason. And you can see that, and this is exactly the kind of things that social media allows today, unfortunately, which is those, first of all, fake news. And then, of course, to believe in whatever you want to believe, because you are surrounded by those echo chambers that social media allows you to live in. For us Israelis, it goes without saying that, of course, terrible things happened on October 7. For them, they can just live in this echo chamber of people who think the same, look the same, pretty much similar. We call it homophilia. Homophilia, that's the most natural way that social network, which are not, I don't mean the online networks, but friends and so on, are being forged by the fact that we are similar. Both of us are white, both of us are leftist, both of us whatever. And you can see that within those echo chambers, people believe in the most, absurd things one can think of.
Now, do you think Israel should do more exposing the atrocities to the Palestinian society, to the Arab world in general, to the Muslim world?
Yes, and I think it's not. I think that Israel is not doing enough for many years, and I must say I have alerted about it at least 3 years ago. I was actually trying to help the American communities in the United States to understand how big is the challenge that they are facing, because it's not only our challenge, explaining our position, but also in America, Jews are under attack. And what we need to do is really to build a huge cyber army that is focusing on influencing with all the most modern tools of influencing. That includes, yes, bots and other tools of AI and machine learning and all these advanced tools to help us to deal with the army of the enemy, which is, by the way, pumped up by Qatar and Iran and Russia and even China. During this war, we can see even anti-Semitic messages for the first time, probably, spreaded by China cyber army. So we cannot stay behind and just, count on our skilled diplomats to deliver the message, to convey the message, while, most of the people are living in those echo chambers and you don't even penetrate into their world. In order to penetrate their world, you need to use extremely advanced tools that allow you to do that. And Israel is neglecting that, unfortunately.
Now, what can we learn from what happened You see, a lot of people say if there's something that Israel learned from 10/7 is that we cannot live like that, meaning we cannot allow a genocidal jihadist Islamist organization like Hamas develop military capacities along our border. Therefore, the operational conclusion is that Israel must proactively take out Hezbollah. You're an expert on Lebanon. You're an expert on the Shiites in Lebanon. Tell us, what can we expect? And first of all, were you surprised that Hezbollah did not join in on October 7th?
I must say, yes, I was surprised. And I can tell you this from a very personal story that I have. A month and a half before the attack, I was sitting in Tenafly, New Jersey with the son of a good friend of mine. His name is Idan Alexander. And he was serving in Golani. I asked him, Idan, where are you at the moment? He said, I'm stationed I'm positioned on the Gazan border. And I asked him, are you and your friends are aware of the fact that a big war is coming? And he said, well, no, not really. And to be honest, I didn't think about Gaza. I thought about Hezbollah. I thought that I was sure a major war is coming. I had some, fierce debates with some of my colleagues who said, no war will come up. But it's not that I was accurate about the way it will erupt. I thought it will come from the north. So yes, of course I was surprised. Of course, what happened to Idan was that Idan was kidnapped on October 7th. And is held hostage in the Gaza Strip, and I hope he's okay. But this story shows you that I was sure everything will start up from the north, and of course when Hamas started it, I was sure that Hezbollah will join, and I actually advised that Israel should be very, very tough with the threat it poses to Hezbollah in those 3-4 critical days, saying we will not tolerate any participation, any strong participation, let's say significant participation. We will not tolerate it in a way that will, put us in danger, including any mean, really, including any mean. If you will invade the Galilee, we will be ready to take harsh measures. So yeah, I was surprised.
Now, in terms of the differences between Hezbollah and Hamas, their ideology, what can you tell us about those differences? Are they different at all, or is the same? It's more of the same.
First of all, both Hezbollah is of course Shiite and Hamas is Sunni, but not only Sunni, but a branch of Muslim Brotherhood, which on a regular day are the enemies of Hezbollah and the Shiites, and you can see that of course in Syria, and that was, by the way, the reason for a rift between Iran and Hezbollah and Hamas for several years since 2012 until they come to good terms again recently. But they do share a common denominator, which is as such. First of all, their objection to the West in general and to Israel in particular. They are determined to preempt any political solution with Israel. Namely, they totally refuse to any acknowledgement of of Israel to exist, period. But they also share a very interesting way of perceiving Israel as a society and a political entity, which is the spider net society. They're saying, look, we know that both of them, and not only them, by the way, the Islamic Jihad, Palestinian Jihad, is also part of this so-called the resistance axis. And they're saying a simple thing. They're saying Israel is not a real society. It's a colonial society. Therefore, they are very weak. They are here only to take advantage of the economic resources of the land. They don't have real roots in this country, and therefore they are a weak society. They all came from Poland or from Russia, and they will go back to Poland, Russia, 2 months before, I think it was Nasrallah saying that his biggest dream was to see the Israelis going to Ben Gurion airport with their luggage in their hands and, going out of the country without a return. This is really their dream. But they're saying, yes, we acknowledge the fact that it's the superiority of Israel in terms of military might and technological power. Yeah, we acknowledge it. But Israel is very weak in terms of moral abilities. They are very, very weak in regard to human casualties. They are very soft. They are not willing to take fatalities. We are, and of course we can, and they are also. They don't have the steadfastness, or in Arabic sumud, in English steadfastness, that we have. Namely, we are able to stand in front of the Israeli fire for a long, long time and to suffer whatever comes with it, but they are impatient. They can't stand it for a long time, and therefore they're weak, and therefore we can beat them if we will stay patient enough, okay, in face of this of the Israeli challenge of military power and so on and so forth. So basically, they see to summarize, they see their advantage as impatience and steadfastness. If we'll stand fastness, we will survive Israel and we will win.
Would you say that this is the overall position of radical Islamist organizations vis-a-vis the West in general? They view Western modernity as a sign of weakness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this is what you're talking about. Hezbollah is looking at Israeli society, mostly looking weaknesses and deficiencies, underestimating the strength of Israeli society. And I think Hamas was probably surprised by the reaction, especially of the younger generation. Some military units, like my son's unit in the reserves, was 150% people showed up, more than required. Yeah. So that was a pretty incredible response of Israeli civic society.
Yeah, and we knew that, but we also knew why they were thinking this way. They don't understand democracies. They didn't understand, for example, the protest, okay, that we experienced here before the war, which was, of course, very unpleasant and very, frightening, even for Israelis. But they interpreted it as a sign of deep weakness. The Israeli society is about to collapse, and once we will just give it a little push and it will break down on the floor. And they were wrong, of course. They were wrong, because the solidarity here and the cohesion of society is probably far stronger than their own, okay? The collective, I'm talking now as a scientist, the collective operation is always the bottom line in any test like this. Okay, are you willing to join a collective operation and to go to war and to form a state and or are you not? And I think the Israeli society shown that how strong it is, and that this is a major strategic actually failure of the axis of mukawama, or axis of resistance.
So going forward, what is your prediction as to Hamas way out of this? Because here we are in the Gaza Strip. Hamas is pretty much crippled. I think that the Israeli government ambitious goal of eradicating Hamas is not going to be met, and I think most Israelis understand that by now. We hope that by the time that this podcast is aired, there'll be a resolution to the hostages crisis. But let's assume that we are facing a lengthy war of attrition, if you may, meaning a lengthy military engagement of the IDF in Gaza. What would be a sufficient achievement as far as Hamas is concerned. My definition is we need to make a distinction between Hamas as a state of mind, which we cannot eradicate, same way we didn't eradicate Al-Qaeda or even the idea of the caliphate, and then Hamas military capacities, which we can.
Of course, and as a rule, of course, and as a rule, even if we destroy 95 or 90% out of their power, this army of terror, I think that's that would be fulfill this goal. I don't know. For me, it was always obvious what it means. I didn't think in terms of ideas and stuff like that. Yes, of course, the Muslim Brotherhood idea is something which is very very strong, and to root it out is a very long-term thing. Which, by the way, we need to say just for the record that ideas can also be destroyed. And I'm taking the position of a historian. Nasserism declined and gone as an idea, and it was a huge idea. The militant idea that pushed Japan during the Second World War was eradicated, mainly because of its failure eventually. So, I mean, when the idea loses its legitimacy and its connection with reality, it will just decline by itself. But this is not what I'm looking for at the moment. I'm looking for destroying Hamas as an organization and as a political power. And after that, yes, I'm fully aware of the fact that we will need to mow the grass, so to speak, in order to keep it checked.
Now, you said something very interesting. You mentioned the example of Japan post-World War II. The disappearance of Nazism. I would assume that you also would mention in the same breath what happened to Germany after World War II. So what do you think, what would it take for the Western world, because Israel cannot do it itself, to really change the mindset, change the DNA of this jihadist movement, the movement that wants to eradicate Western values, that is fighting modernity?
Well, this is really a mission which is, I don't know if we can, I don't know even if it can be achievable, but what I know in terms of Gaza or in relation to the Gaza Strip is that we have to offer them an alternative. We need to be very tough in de-Hamasization, namely to change totally their education system, and I got the best candidates for this as well, Saudi Arabia and United Emirates, that actually eradicated the Muslim Brotherhood from their own education system, and they have a very good experience with that. However, it won't work without offering an alternative. The alternative, by the way, it doesn't need to be a sort of secular Western ideology. That won't work. You know, what we learned from Japan and from Germany and other cases like that is that part of their success was the ability to preserve some of the old elements, things that existed before the war. For example, anti-communism as an idea, and to preserve it and to take it forward. So in our case, it would be Islam, but a different kind of Islam, not radical Islam, but rather an Islam which is successful, which is pro-life. And you can find those elements in Islam like in any religion.
Forward-looking. By the way, were there any significant religious leaders in the Muslim world that expressed opposition to what happened on October 7th, or all of them were silent?
Well, the only country that actually denounced the October 7th openly was United Arab Emirates, which is our best friend at the moment. I hope they will stay that way in the long term, but because the whole thing is, of course, fragile. But you don't hear too many of those, okay, denouncing, and most of them are trying to to shilly-shally between their so-called street and of course what goes obviously for any Westerner that you need to denounce it. But hey, Norway did not denounce Hamas for October 7th. So, before we ask the Arabs to do that, maybe we need to look at some of the so-called Western countries that, for some reason, have a very twisted understanding of what is going on.
Now, you mentioned that you were in New Jersey, in Tenafly, New Jersey, before the war, and we're all fully aware of the heavily funded academic programs in the United States by Arab countries, primarily by Qatar and other actors. What do you think Israel should do to counter that? And if there's any role that you see for the Jewish community in this effort in the Western world, not just the United States?
Yeah, definitely. First of all, it's not just the funding of Qatar. It's also the organization of the Muslim Brotherhood in America, which you can call it Hamas because all of, let's say, the major organization there, like AMP and CARE and other Muslim American organizations are basically Muslim Brotherhood and basically Hamas-led organization. People like Niad Awaid, Palestinian leading CARE, probably the most prominent Muslim organization in America, AMP by Hatem Baziam, who is also well known as a BDS leader. So everything is orchestrated by a network of dozens of organizations that are all Muslim Brotherhood, each take care of a different area, legal, public, educational, funding, all sorts of things, and they're working together in this loose tie network, and that's a real threat on the Jews in America and on America's stance vis-a-vis Israel in general. So we need to understand that it's not only Qatar funding. What the Jews need to do in America is, first of all, to unite. For God's sake, unite. And I'm saying it with a lot of pain because I met, all the leaders of America, really the highest that you can think of, the most senior ones. And I told them, that one of the problems is that you're not uniting together. You're not organized. You have World Jewish Congress and you have ADL and you have all this and you don't work with each other, including animosity, between the organization. And I asked one of the main leaders, is there a possibility that you will work together? And he said, with gesture with his hand, never, like this. So I think it's a huge problem, and you can take this organizational problem of the Jewish organization in America all the way down, to the street level, and to see that Jewish organization that once used to be really the spearhead of Jewish power and influence in America are now so enfeebled. For example, Hillel, all right, in each university. Now we're talking about a very weak organization that its local leaders are extremely frightened to do anything because they will be attacked. So the Jews need to unite and to stand up.
Well, and I think this is an appropriate message to conclude our unfortunately too brief interview. Dr. Harel Chorev, I'd like to thank you for spending time with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for educating us. Thank you for enriching us, sharing with your experience. And hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Thank you very much.
And to our viewers and listeners back home, goodbye from Tel Aviv until our next episode of TAU Unbound.
This is TAU Unbound, the English language podcast of Tel Aviv University. Please welcome your host, Aharoni, Tel Aviv University's graduate, member of the Board of Governors, lecturer, writer, and veteran diplomat.